Have you ever known a truth so devastating that staying silent would destroy innocent people, but speaking up would destroy your own life? What if I told you that sometimes the most important words ever spoken are the ones that interrupt a wedding, and that sometimes love requires us to be the villain in someone else's story to be the hero in what really matters? Prepare yourself for the most shocking wedding day revelation you'll ever hear. Because sometimes the person who objects at the altar isn't trying to ruin love, they're trying to save it. This is the story of how I stood up in the most exclusive church in Paris, in front of 400 of France's most powerful people, and destroyed what everyone thought was a fairy tale wedding. Because I had learned that fairy tales can be lies, and sometimes the only way to protect true love is to expose false love for what it really is. My name is Claire Dubois, I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how I became the most hated woman in Paris for exactly 7 minutes, until everyone realized I had just saved the most beloved man in France from the biggest mistake of his life. 2 years ago, I knocked on the door of the most beautiful mansion in the 16th arrondissement, carrying nothing but hope and a literature degree that hadn't been able to find me work anywhere else. I was applying to be a domestic worker for Vincent Beaumont, one of France's youngest billionaires, and I was desperate enough to take any job that would pay my rent. Vincent Beaumont was 43 years old and worth 2.8 billion euros. He had built Beaumont hotels from a single-family inn in Provence into a luxury empire spanning 5 continents. His hotels hosted presidents, celebrities, and royalty. His personal wealth rivaled old European nobility, and his social influence reached the highest levels of French society. But Vincent was also a widower. His wife Isabelle had died in a car accident 5 years earlier, leaving him to raise their daughter Sophie alone. Sophie was 7 when I first met her, a beautiful, intelligent child who carried a sadness that no 7-year-old should ever know. The Beaumont mansion was like something from a museum: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork worth more than most people's homes. But despite all its grandeur, it felt cold and empty, like a beautiful shell with no soul. Sophie was being cared for by a series of nannies who treated her like a job rather than a child. Vincent worked constantly, traveling between his properties around the world, always promising Sophie he would spend more time with her but never following through. The house was elegant and perfectly maintained, but it wasn't a home. It was a monument to loneliness. I was hired as household staff officially to clean and organize, but really to do whatever needed doing. What I discovered was that what needed doing most was loving a little girl who was starving for attention and caring for a man who had forgotten how to live instead of just working. Sophie attached herself to me immediately. She was hungry for someone who would listen to her stories, help with her homework, play games, and treat her like she mattered. I had studied literature at the Sorbonne before financial difficulties forced me to leave, so I was able to help her with schoolwork in ways that impressed her teachers and even Vincent. Vincent noticed the change in Sophie within weeks. She was happier, more talkative, doing better in school, and for the first time since her mother's death, she seemed like a normal child instead of a miniature adult carrying too much sorrow. "Sophie seems different," Vincent said to me one evening when he came home to find us reading together in the library. "She's lighter somehow. What are you doing differently?" I looked up from the book we were sharing, Le Petit Prince, and said, "I'm not doing anything different, Monsieur Beaumont. I'm just treating her like a child instead of an obligation." The words came out more honestly than I intended, and I immediately worried I had crossed a line. But Vincent didn't seem offended. Instead, he sat down in the chair across from us and asked, "Would you read to me too?" I don't remember the last time I heard that story. That evening changed something fundamental in the household. Vincent began coming home earlier, joining our reading sessions, asking Sophie about her day, and slowly learning how to be present for his daughter instead of just providing for her. Over the following months, I watched Vincent transform from a distant, work-obsessed billionaire into an engaged, loving father. Sophie blossomed under his renewed attention, and the house that had felt like a museum began to feel like a home. And somewhere in the process of helping them become a family again, I fell in love with both of them, with Sophie as the daughter I'd never had, and with Vincent as a man who was far more complex and caring than his public image suggested. But I knew my place. I was the help, he was a billionaire. I was temporary, he was building something permanent. So I kept my feelings to myself and focused on doing what was best for Sophie, which was helping her father learn to love her properly. Everything changed when Margot Delacroix entered our lives. Margot was everything I wasn't: sophisticated, elegant, connected to French high society through her aristocratic family name. She was 33 years old, had attended the right schools, moved in the right circles, and possessed the kind of effortless grace that money can't buy but breeding can create. Vincent met her at a charity gala for children's education. Ironic, considering what I would later learn about her true feelings toward children. Margot was serving on the organizing committee, representing her family's foundation, and she made quite an impression on Vincent with her intelligence, beauty, and apparent dedication to charitable causes. Within weeks, Margot was a regular presence at the mansion. She would arrive for dinner dates with Vincent looking like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, bearing expensive gifts for Sophie and speaking knowledgeably about art, literature, and social causes. Sophie was initially excited about Margot's attention. After years of having only servants and the occasional nanny for female company, having an elegant, sophisticated woman show interest in her felt special. "Claire," Sophie said to me after one of Margot's early visits, "do you think Papa might marry Margot? She's very pretty and she knows a lot about books like you do." I felt something twist in my chest at the question, but I smiled and said, "What do you think about that possibility, ma chérie?" Sophie considered this seriously. "I think it would be nice to have a mama again. But I hope if Papa marries her, you won't go away. I want both of you." The innocence of that statement broke my heart. Sophie had no idea that if Vincent married Margot, there would be no place for me in their household. Rich wives don't keep female domestic staff who've grown too close to the family. For the first few months, Margot seemed genuinely interested in building a relationship with Sophie. She took her shopping for designer clothes, enrolled her in writing lessons at an exclusive club, and spoke enthusiastically about the cultural advantages she could provide as a stepmother. Vincent was clearly smitten. After 5 years of emotional isolation, he was like a man discovering sunlight after living in a cave. Margot gave him sophisticated companionship, social connections that benefited his business, and the promise of providing Sophie with a mother figure. But I began to notice things that bothered me about Margot's behavior when Vincent wasn't around. She was impatient with Sophie when the child didn't immediately understand instructions. She made subtle criticisms about Sophie's appearance, her mannerisms, her interests. She would arrive at the house and barely acknowledge the staff, treating us like furniture rather than people. Most concerning, she would often take phone calls in the garden, speaking in low, urgent tones that she would immediately end if anyone approached. I told myself I was being jealous and paranoid. Of course I would find fault with any woman who threatened to disrupt the family dynamic I had helped create. Vincent deserved happiness, and if Margot could provide that while also being a good stepmother to Sophie, then my personal feelings were irrelevant. 6 months after they started dating, Vincent proposed to Margot during a romantic dinner at the Tour d'Argent. The engagement was announced in Le Figaro and celebrated throughout Parisian society. The wedding was scheduled for September at Église Saint-Germain-des-Prés, with a reception at the Musée d'Orsay. Everything changed after the engagement announcement. Margot began spending more time at the mansion, gradually taking over household management decisions and making changes that she said would modernize the way the house was run. Some of her changes made sense, updating outdated systems, improving efficiency. But other changes seemed designed to distance Vincent from the staff who had become like family to him. Especially me. "Vincent," I overheard Margot say one evening, "don't you think it's inappropriate for Sophie to be so attached to the household staff? She should be learning to socialize with children from appropriate families, not treating servants like family members." Vincent's response was too quiet for me to hear, but I felt a chill of fear about what Margot's influence might mean for Sophie and for my place in their lives. My worst fears were confirmed 3 weeks before the wedding, when I accidentally overheard a phone conversation that changed everything. I was cleaning the conservatory when Margot came into the adjoining salon for what she thought was a private phone call. The glass doors between the rooms were closed, but I could hear every word clearly. "Antoine, mon chéri," she said in a voice completely different from the one she used with Vincent. "Only 3 more weeks and then we'll be free to be together properly." I froze, my cleaning cloth suspended in midair. "I know it's difficult," she continued, "but think about what we'll gain. Vincent's fortune will give us everything we've ever wanted. And once I'm established as his wife, we can be discreet about our relationship. There was a pause as she listened to the person on the other end. "Of course I don't love him," she said with a laugh that sounded like ice breaking. "He's old, he's boring, and he comes with a needy child who follows me around like a puppy. But he's also worth 3 billion euros, and marrying him is much easier than earning that kind of money ourselves." I felt sick to my stomach, but I couldn't stop listening. "The child," Margot said dismissively. "I have plans for that. There's an excellent boarding school in Switzerland that specializes in difficult children. Once I'm Vincent's wife, I'll convince him that Sophie needs the structure and discipline that only a proper institution can provide. She'll be out of our hair 9 months a year." The conversation continued for another few minutes, with Margot detailing plans for accessing Vincent's accounts, selling some of his art collection, and eventually moving Antoine into one of Vincent's secondary properties where they could continue their relationship. When she finally hung up, I was shaking with rage and fear. Sophie, sweet, innocent Sophie, who had already lost one mother, was about to gain a stepmother who saw her as an obstacle to be removed. If you believe that some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and that protecting children is more important than protecting reputations, leave the word "protect" in the comments. Subscribe because what I do next will shock you, and the choice I make will change everything. I spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with what to do about the information I had overheard. Every option seemed impossible. I could tell Vincent directly, but who would believe the word of a domestic employee against his fiancée, especially with no proof? Margot had been careful. I had no recording, no witnesses, just my account of a conversation I had admittedly overheard while eavesdropping. I could try to find evidence of Margot's affair with Antoine, but I was just the household staff. I had no resources for investigation, no access to her private communications, no way to prove what I knew to be true. I could simply quit and distance myself from the disaster I saw coming. But that would mean abandoning Sophie to a fate I knew would break her heart and possibly damage her for life. Or I could find a way to expose Margot's deception publicly, in a manner so undeniable that Vincent would have to see the truth. The wedding was planned for a Saturday morning in September. The guest list included 400 of the most influential people in France: politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and old aristocratic families. The ceremony would be covered by society magazines and attended by people whose opinions could make or break reputations. If I was going to act, it would have to be spectacular, undeniable, and perfectly timed. I spent the week before the wedding gathering what evidence I could. I couldn't access Margot's phone or private communications, but I could observe her behavior and try to catch her in conversations with Antoine. Antoine Rousseau, I discovered through social media research, was a 26-year-old actor who had appeared in several small French films and television series. He was handsome in a brooding, artistic way, and from his online presence, he clearly lived beyond the means that his acting career would provide. I began timing my work schedule to coincide with Margot's visits to the mansion, hoping to catch another revealing phone conversation or perhaps even see Antoine in person. My persistence paid off 4 days before the wedding. I was working in the garden when I saw a man approaching the house through the service entrance. He was tall, dark-haired, and moved with the confident swagger of someone used to being admired. When Margot answered the door, they embraced with an intimacy that left no doubt about their relationship. I quickly positioned myself where I could see them through the kitchen window while remaining hidden. They were arguing about something, their voices raised enough for me to catch fragments of conversation. "Can't wait much longer," Antoine was saying. "This charade is killing me." "Just 4 more days," Margot replied. "Once the ceremony is over and I'm legally his wife, we can start planning our real future together. And the child? We'll be in Switzerland by Christmas. I've already researched the schools. Vincent thinks I'm planning cultural enrichment for Sophie, but really I'm planning to get her out of our way." They kissed passionately, and I felt sick watching this betrayal of Vincent's trust and Sophie's innocent affection. But then Antoine said something that gave me the leverage I needed. "What about when Vincent wants children of his own with you?" Margot laughed cruelly. "That won't be a problem. I'm already pregnant, Antoine. With your child. I'll let Vincent believe it's his, and by the time the baby is born, I'll be so established in his life that he'll never question paternity." This revelation was even worse than I had imagined. Margot wasn't just planning to deceive Vincent about her feelings and her fidelity. She was planning to trick him into raising another man's child. I had my evidence. Not recorded proof, but information so specific and verifiable that it would be impossible to dismiss. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and rainy, as if Paris itself disapproved of what was about to happen. Église Saint-Germain-des-Prés was decorated with thousands of white roses and crystal arrangements that probably cost more than most people earn in a year. I had not been invited to the wedding. Household staff don't attend their employer's social events, but I knew every detail of the schedule because I had helped Sophie prepare for her role as flower girl. Sophie had been excited about the wedding for weeks, practicing walking slowly and scattering petals, trying on her dress repeatedly, and talking endlessly about how beautiful Margot would look and how happy Papa would be. "Claire," she had said to me the night before, "tomorrow I'll have a real mama again. Do you think my first mama would be happy about that?" I had barely been able to answer without crying. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 11 a.m. At 10:30, I put on my best dress, a simple navy blue outfit that I hoped would help me blend into the crowd, and made my way to the church. I had no invitation, no right to be there, and no idea how I would get inside without being stopped by security. But I had a truth that needed to be told, and I was determined to find a way to tell it. The solution came from an unexpected source. As I approached the church, I saw vendors setting up flowers for the reception, caterers carrying supplies, and photographers checking their equipment. In the chaos of final preparations, one more person in professional attire didn't attract attention. I slipped into the church through a side entrance used by the staff and found a spot in the back where I could see the altar but remain relatively hidden among the photographers and wedding planners who were managing last-minute details. The guests began arriving at 10:45, a parade of wealth and influence that represented the cream of French society. I recognized politicians from newspapers, celebrities from magazines, and business leaders whose names appeared regularly in financial publications. Vincent arrived at 10:55, looking handsome in his morning coat but nervous in a way that made my heart ache. He took his place at the altar beside the priest, checking his watch repeatedly and adjusting his tie. Sophie appeared at 11 o'clock sharp, looking like a fairy tale princess in her flower girl dress. She walked down the aisle scattering rose petals with serious concentration, and when she reached the altar, she looked up at Vincent with such pure love and trust that I almost lost my resolve. How could I destroy this child's happiness? How could I humiliate her father in front of everyone who mattered to him? How could I be the person who turned what should be a celebration into a catastrophe? Then Margot appeared at the back of the church, and my doubts evaporated. She was breathtaking. An absolute vision in a custom Dior gown that probably cost more than I would earn in 5 years. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her smile radiant. She looked like every little girl's dream of what a bride should be. But I knew what lay beneath that beautiful facade. I knew about Antoine, about the pregnancy, about her plans for Sophie, about the cold calculation behind every loving gesture she had ever shown Vincent. The congregation rose as Margot walked down the aisle, her smile never wavering as she approached the altar where Vincent waited with tears of joy in his eyes. The ceremony began with the traditional Catholic wedding mass. I listened to readings about love and commitment, to prayers about the sanctity of marriage, to promises about faithfulness and devotion, all while knowing that every word was built on a foundation of lies. When the priest reached the vows, Vincent spoke first. His voice was strong and emotional as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Margot for the rest of his life. He spoke about how she had brought light back into his world after years of darkness, how she had given him hope for a future he had thought was impossible. Margot's vows were equally beautiful, expertly delivered words about devotion, partnership, and her excitement about building a family with Vincent and Sophie. She spoke about loving Sophie as her own daughter and creating a home filled with happiness and love. Every word was a lie, delivered with perfect sincerity to an audience that believed completely in her performance. Then came the moment I had been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. If any person here present knows of any lawful impediment why these two persons should not be joined together in holy matrimony, the priest intoned in his formal ceremonial voice, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The church fell silent. This was traditionally a formality. Modern weddings rarely included this ancient ritual, and when they did, no one ever actually spoke up. I felt my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. My hands were shaking, my mouth was dry, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to stay silent, to let this moment pass, to avoid becoming the person who destroyed what looked like a fairy tale. But then I saw Sophie standing beside the altar in her flower girl dress, looking up at Margot with absolute trust and affection, and I found my voice. "I object," I said, standing up from my hiding place in the back of the church. The words carried clearly through the silent sanctuary, and 400 heads turned to stare at me in shock. Vincent's face went white. Margot's perfect smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself. "I object to this marriage," I said more loudly, walking toward the altar as security guards began moving in my direction, "because the bride is committing fraud." The gasps from the congregation were audible. Cameras flashed as society photographers realized they were witnessing the scandal of the decade. "Who are you?" the priest asked, clearly having no idea how to handle this unprecedented situation. "My name is Claire Dubois," I said, continuing to walk toward the altar despite the security guards closing in. "I work for Monsieur Beaumont, and I know something about his fiancée that he needs to hear before he makes the biggest mistake of his life." "Vincent," Margot said quickly, her voice still perfectly controlled, "this woman is disturbed. She's obsessed with you and Sophie. I had to have her dismissed from our household for inappropriate behavior." It was a brilliant counterattack positioning me as a jealous, unstable employee, whose accusations couldn't be trusted. I saw doubt flicker across Vincent's face. "3 days ago," I said loudly before security could reach me, "Madame Delacroix met with her lover Antoine Rousseau at your house, Monsieur Beaumont. They discussed their plans to use your marriage to access your fortune, to send Sophie to boarding school in Switzerland to get her out of their way, and to continue their affair after the wedding." The church erupted in shocked murmurs. Margot's face had gone pale, but she recovered quickly. "This is insane," she said to Vincent. "She's making up lies because she's jealous. I've never heard of anyone named Antoine Rousseau." "You're also pregnant," I continued, my voice carrying over the chaos in the church. "With his child, not Monsieur Beaumont's, though you plan to let your husband believe he's the father." Now Vincent was staring at Margot with a look of growing horror. "Margot," he said quietly, "tell me this isn't true." "Of course it isn't true," Margot said, but I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "Vincent, you know me. You know I love you and Sophie. This woman is clearly unstable." "Then you won't mind," I said, pulling out my phone, explaining this. I had managed to take a photo of Margot and Antoine kissing at the service entrance. It wasn't proof of everything I had accused her of, but it was undeniable evidence that she was lying about not knowing him. I held up the phone so Vincent could see the image, and watched his face crumble as he recognized both Margot and the man she was kissing. "You photographed me without permission," Margot said, her composure finally beginning to crack. "That's illegal. Vincent, she's been stalking us." But Vincent was no longer looking at me. He was staring at Margot with the expression of a man watching his world collapse. "Who is he?" Vincent asked quietly. "Nobody," Margot said quickly. "Just someone who was bothering me. I was trying to get rid of him. The photo is taken out of context." "His name is Antoine Rousseau," I said. "He's an actor. He's 26 years old. And if you check Madame Delacroix's phone, you'll find months of communications with him." "Give me your phone," Vincent said to Margot. "What? Vincent, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to be interrogated like a criminal based on the accusations of a disturbed employee." "Give me your phone," Vincent repeated, his voice deadly quiet. The church was completely silent now, 400 people watching this private drama unfold in the most public possible setting. Margot looked around desperately, realizing that her perfect plan was falling apart. "Vincent, please. Let's discuss this privately. Don't let this woman destroy our wedding day with her lies." "The phone, Margot." Reluctantly, Margot handed over her phone. Vincent's hands were shaking as he scrolled through her messages, his face growing more devastated with each passing second. "Antoine," he read aloud. "Yesterday at 3 p.m. Only 24 hours until we're rich, mon amour. I can't wait to start our real life together." Margot's face went dead white. Vincent continued reading. "Tuesday at 11 p.m. I found the perfect school in Switzerland for the child. She'll be gone by Christmas and we'll never have to deal with her again. Sophie, who had been standing quietly through this entire exchange, suddenly understood that they were talking about her. "Papa," she said in a small voice. "What does that mean?" Vincent looked at his daughter, then at Margot, then at me. "How long have you known?" he asked me. "I overheard the first conversation 2 weeks ago," I said. "I've been trying to find a way to tell you that wouldn't destroy Sophie's happiness. But I couldn't let you marry someone who plans to send your daughter away and deceive you about her pregnancy." "Pregnancy?" Vincent said, his voice barely audible. I felt awful for Sophie, who was hearing all of this, but there was no way to protect her from the truth now. "She's pregnant with Antoine's child," I said as gently as I could. "She planned to let you believe you were the father." Vincent turned to Margot, who was now crying. Whether from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation, I couldn't tell. "Is it true?" he asked her. Margot looked around the church at 400 faces staring at her with shock and growing disgust. Her perfect plan had been exposed in the worst possible way, and there was no recovering from this humiliation. "You have no idea," she said, her voice turning cold and vicious, "how exhausting it's been pretending to care about you and your needy child. Do you think I enjoyed playing house with a boring widower and his damaged daughter?" The transformation was startling. The elegant, loving woman disappeared completely, replaced by someone cruel and calculating. €3 billion, she continued, all pretense abandoned now. "That's what this was about. Your money. Did you really think someone like me would choose someone like you for any other reason?" The church was in chaos now. People were shouting, cameras were flashing, and security was trying to manage a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. But I only cared about 2 people in that crowd: Vincent, who looked like his heart was breaking all over again, and Sophie, who was crying and reaching for him in confusion and fear. Vincent scooped Sophie into his arms and held her tightly. "I'm sorry, ma chérie," he whispered. "Papa made a mistake, but it's going to be okay." Then he looked at me across the chaos of the church. "Claire," he said, his voice carrying despite the noise. "Thank you." 2 hours later, the church was empty except for Vincent, Sophie, me, and a few close family members trying to process what had happened. The reception had been cancelled, the guests had gone home with the scandal of the century to discuss, and the media was already reporting on the wedding that had become a public humiliation. Margot and Antoine had disappeared together, their scheme exposed and their reputations destroyed. The photos and videos of the confrontation were already spreading across social media, making them both unemployable in French society. Vincent sat in the front pew of the empty church, still wearing his wedding clothes, holding Sophie while she slept against his shoulder. "How did you know?" he asked me quietly. I told him everything: the phone conversations I had overheard, the meeting with Antoine, the pregnancy revelation, and the weeks I had spent trying to figure out how to warn him. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" he asked. "Who would believe the household staff over your fiancé?" I said. I needed proof, and today was the only chance I had to make sure everyone would see the truth at the same time. Vincent was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You risked everything for us. Your job, your reputation, your place in our lives. Why?" I looked at Sophie sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, and at Vincent, whose kindness and love for his daughter had captured my heart despite every reason why it shouldn't have. "Because I love you both," I said simply. "And I couldn't watch you destroy your lives with someone who would hurt you." 6 months later, Vincent and I were married in the same church where I had exposed Margot's deception. It was a small ceremony with only family and close friends, but it was filled with genuine love and joy instead of performance and lies. Sophie was our maid of honor, and during the ceremony, she gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. When Margot was going to be my mama, I thought I would be happy because I wanted a mama so much. But Claire showed me that the best mamas aren't the ones who promise to love you. They're the ones who prove they love you by protecting you, even when it's hard. Claire protected me and Papa from someone who would have hurt us, and she didn't care if people would be angry with her for telling the truth. That's how I know she's my real mama now. 2 years later, we welcomed our own daughter, Isabel, giving Sophie the sister she had always wanted and completing our family in ways I had never imagined possible. Margot's story didn't end well. The scandal destroyed her reputation in French society, and Antoine abandoned her once their scheme was exposed. She had the baby DNA tests confirmed it was indeed Antoine's, but lost custody due to her mental instability and financial problems. But our story had the ending that fairy tales are supposed to have. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was real, built on truth instead of lies, and protected by people willing to fight for what mattered most. Sometimes love means standing up in a church and destroying what looks like happiness to protect what actually is happiness. Sometimes the person who objects at the altar isn't the villain of the story. They're the hero who saves the day by refusing to let love be destroyed by lies. If this story reminded you that truth is more important than comfort, and that protecting the people we love sometimes requires us to be brave in ways that seem impossible, share it with someone who needs to remember that real love is worth fighting for. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories about courage, love, and the power of standing up for what's right, even when it costs us everything. Because in a world full of beautiful lies, we all need reminders that the most important truths are the ones that are hardest to tell. Remember that your own voice matters, your own truth has power, and someone needs you to be brave enough to speak up when everyone else stays silent. Because sometimes the most important words we ever say are the ones that interrupt the wrong story to make room for the right one.